He started the introduction to the Gospel and of John, and made some announcements about what was so unique about John's Gospel as compared to what we call the Synoptic Gospels. Remember the Synoptics? Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? And why do we call them Synoptics?
Synergy?
Sorry?
Synergy?
They're the same.
Well, SYN, obviously saying they work together, but they see the same thing, the optics. So they have much, the content is often, there's a lot of it that is kind of the same, but it's covered, their details may be different, some add some different stories and so forth, but they're pretty much close to being the same sort of story. But John is just so incredibly different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And we capture that in that, remember that being in Ezekiel. There was a four-faced, hey Emily, four-faced being, and you remember what that was when people try and utilize the faces that are on those four-faced beings, they sort of they assign each face of one of those beings to one of the Gospels. Anybody remember what that form was?
I know there was an eagle.
Yeah, a bear.
Okay, that's for the name.
Oh, the name.
Tetramorph. That's nothing to really, just, you want to impress your friends or something in a trivial pursuit or something. But anyway, the idea is it's four forms. And so you have, for instance, one side was the eagle, you had an ox, you had a man, and I think it was a lion was the last one. And John is represented by the eagle. Why is that kind of akin to him?
Yes. Because he was so specific, or
Eagle, they
Eagle
look into the
sun.
sun. Okay, the idea is they peer above everything else. They can look straight. The harshness of the light, essentially. That's what you get when you look at the story of John. So, John is seen as the eagle, and we talked about the author. John was, whose brother was he? James. Okay, and whose son was he? And who was his mother? Salome, okay. And remember, she was the one that brought her two kids, John and James, to Jesus and said, hey, you can't get in your kingdom. Can this guy sit on your left, this guy sit on your right? I mean, that is, pretty good chutzpah there to do that.
That wasn't listed in John, right?
No.
I think that's a good point. John, never going to mention that. Okay. That's what she inquired. But remember, Peter, James, and John, including Peter, were part of that inner circle of Jesus and the disciples. He brought them into the garden with him in the transfiguration and so forth. So we have this inner circle to work with, and so we were part of that. When was the book of John written?
You said anywhere from what, 65?
65 to 95, somewhere in that range. There's no publishing date in the book, we don't know. But, you try and look at events in there, can you tell? It's really hard to tell. We know it's between 65 and 95. That's about it. As close as we can accurately pin down, at least.
I think most people say from 90 to 60.
Generally, a lot of people give the later date. All right, and it's provenance, if you want to call it that. I think that is its origin. Remember that. Where was it written is what I'm asking.
What?
Where was it written?
In Ephesus.
Yeah, it was written from Ephesus. Providence or something like that.
That's the name of it?
No,
That's what you'd say. That's when you want to talk like artwork. Where does it come from? What was its origin and so forth? So you look at textual criticism and so forth. Provenance is like, where did it come from? What was its origin?
So I would have that.
In this case, you would say it was written from Ephesus. How they would look at it.
It was written from Ephesus?
Yeah, it was written in Ephesus. He wrote it in Ephesus. Yeah. That's believed. Okay. Its purpose. This is usually it's got a purpose clause on the book, which is pretty cool, right? And where do we find that purpose clause?
Chapter 20.
In chapter 20, in verse 31, I'll read it. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. What are the these that he's talking about when he says these are written?
The word.
The words, it also is referring to the signs, okay? He says, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. It was John 20:31. And couple that with the previous word. So, who was his intended audience?
The Jews.
The Jews, certainly the Jews were a key component of this. But he's looking beyond the Jewish people. He's looking to all Greeks as well, the Gentile world. And we'll see that just because of the nature of the book, it talks about cosmos, the world, so to speak, and he uses it in language that expresses this for all people. He's going to basically make sure that the Jewish people understand it, because you can see the way his argumentation goes. And we'll look at that a little bit later this morning. We talked about a number of factoids in the John's Gospel, the thing that sort of make it unique partly. There's no coverage of the Last Supper in terms of like instituting of the bread and the wine and so forth. He doesn't list the apostles the way that the other Gospels go through it. So it's unique in a lot of things that it omits, that it doesn't include, okay? But it obviously includes things that the others do not have. And it certainly focuses on the Trinity is one of the unique things that this gospel really covers in the most detail than all the others. And we'll find that out as we study it in both the ontological and the economic sense, as we have looked at months ago in our study of the Trinity. So there are 7 signs, quote unquote. I mean, it's said that he did many more signs. The ones that are sort of said to be the signs covered in the book, how many are there supposedly? 7 signs. Is that significant? 7 is kind of a significant number, but at any rate, 7 is the number that are covered. And there's also 7 I ams that are mentioned in the book. So there are more listed, but these are ones that are sort of specific to a certain title. All right, look at the Gospel of John, the structure of it, real quickly. It has the prologue. The prologue is verses 1 through 18, and we're going to cover the first 5 verses of that this morning. Then you have what is called the Book of Signs, and those are verses from 119 to 1250. I'll send this out. You'll have this in the handout here, so I'm not going to write it on the board right now. And then there's what they call the farewell instructions, which is the upper room discourse. Remember that? John 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And then you have the passion and the resurrection chapters of chapter 18 and 19. And then finally you have the epilogue, chapter 21. Okay. So last week I handed out some sheets, kind of like those form sheets that you have there. And the intention there was to get us just get familiar with the book. Just know it kind of like you're walking along a hiking trail, and you're going to come up on this beautiful vista and see a mountain or see a valley or a glen or something like that, or you're walking through the rooms of the house, and you're going to going into the dining room. You got this beautiful table there, or whatever, something like that. So you get familiar. I don't want you to memorize everything, every line of the book by any means. Let's just get to know the book. What's in each chapter? What are the specific events, narratives, people, and so forth that are covered in this chapter? And just to help so you know where you are in this book, what's coming up next, what you just left, and where it's heading to, so to speak. Just get real familiar. And I think you'll have a great appreciation for the book. So it's getting really, really familiar with it. In other words, I don't want to come in here and say, okay, what did we last study in chapter 5? And you say, I have no idea whatever we studied, So I think as we do this, you'll really have a greater appreciation for the scriptures in general. How many chapters are in the book? 21. Very good. Okay, so do this little exercise where what I'm asking you to do is just on this sheet, there's a couple of lines for each chapter, and just write down the content of the chapter. What's the basic things? And just do that. So maybe start from memory. Just try it from memory first, see what you can come up with, and then go back, crack open the Bible, and say, oh, I forgot this, or I forgot, just to get familiar. I don't care if you use the headings that are in the actual text that are going to find in your Bible, but just get familiar with it is all I'm trying to get Okay, so let's do a little quiz here. Okay, we'll see how well you did your exercise there. In chapter 2, what happens?
The wedding at Cana.
Yes, very good, very good.
I read well.
You do well. Okay. Anything else happen in that?
First miracle.
It was the first sign.
Yes.
Jesus cleanses the temple.
He cleared out the temple.
That too happens, isn't it?
Yes.
And
Good one.
there's one other little thing that happens. He's not entrusting himself to man. He can see in what's man's mind, okay? It's just a couple of sentences or two that are in there.
Are you talking about verse 23 through
It's at the end,
25?
yeah.
Jesus knows what is in man.
Exactly, right, yeah. So that'd be like 3 things to cover in that, if you wanted to put in that area of chapter 2. Okay, in chapter 4, what happens?
A woman at the well.
The woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well.
Yeah.
Indeed, yes. And what else?
And he heals the officials.
He heals the official's son, yeah, or the noble, yes, exactly right. There's one of the, so in that whole woman at the well thing, I found it would be significant to me to just add in there, he conversed with her, but the village essentially got converted. Maybe that would be significant. A large number of contingent of that village believed. So that's kind of so they believed in mass. And then the nobleman's son was healed. Okay, chapter 18.
Chapter 18.
Last part of the quiz.
Oh, that's when he was arrested.
Yes, the betrayal and the arrest in the garden.
Faces Annas and Caiaphas.
Yeah, he's
Pilate.
trial before Annas and Caiaphas, and he's delivered to Pilate for execution, and he has part of his discourse with Pilate there. Okay, so there are 7 signs, as I said, and I just thought, there's just different ways you can do to try and help you remember what sign is where. Okay, so you mentioned first sign with Cana, right? The wedding at Cana. Yeah, and what was the last one? Anybody remember the last one?
Lazarus.
Lazarus. Okay, you got a bookend that leaves those two, and says in between chapter 2 and chapter 11, where we have all these signs, right? So what's in the middle?
Well, what about when Peter cut the
Ear off and lock the
ear
ear
off
off?
and he put it back on?
That's not in that, and it's not in John. Okay. But correct me if I'm wrong, Peg. I could be wrong.
I thought I
But
saw
don't think
that.
it's in
I'm
John.
sorry.
Maybe you're right. I will correct myself. So, anyway, I know I will be tested here. So, at any rate, but do you remember in the middle of the thing? I sort of have this thing. I think of 4, 5, 6. So, 4, 5, and 6. So we have the fourth sign, the 5,000 being fed in chapter 6. So come up with your own ideas of how to remember something like that. I did ask chat.
What is?
Okay, the fourth sign, 4,
Yeah.
5, 6. Fourth sign, 5,000 fed in the 6th chapter.
It does have where he cut his ear off, but it doesn't say he put it back on.
Okay.
That
It doesn't say
cut it
Jesus.
off.
It says
Didn't
that Peter
heal it.
cut it off, but
Yeah.
it doesn't
Doesn't say
it doesn't say that
Jesus-
Jesus put it
Okay.
back on.
So I was half
Didn't heal
right.
it. We don't get inside it.
Yeah, right, okay. All
Well,
right.
no, I saw that it said about him cutting the ear off,
It might be in Luke.
but I did
think.
not,
But
I didn't
anyway.
go any further to see if they put it back on. I just assumed,
Right.
since he said that he cut it off.
I asked ChatGPT for a little help, just to see what ChatGPT could do for me, okay? I say,
That's-
Chat, that's the
that
AI,
AI.
artificial intelligence thing that,
Can write papers for you.
Give me a rhythmic song or something to memorize, to have about the songs, okay?
About the
signs, I'm sorry. So, here's what it said. Here's a rhythmic and catchy song capturing the 7 signs of the Gospel of John, paired with their corresponding chapters, okay? It doesn't have a really, truly rhythmic beat to it, but I'm just going to go through. Verse 1. In chapter 2, at Cana's feast, water turned to wine, the joy increased. Chapter 4, the nobleman's son, healed from afar by the Holy One. And the chorus. 7 signs, oh, can you see? Miracles show his divinity. Every sign, a light divine, revealing the Savior in every line. Verse 2. In chapter 5, the lame man walks by the pool, no longer blocked. Chapter 6, the crowd he fed. 5 loaves, 2 fish, thousands fed. And the bridge. Through the signs his glory shone, each a glimpse of heaven's throne. Believe in him, the Son of Man, the Word made flesh, the great I am. Verse 3. In chapter 6, on waters wide, Jesus walked, his disciples guide. Chapter 9, the blind could see, he healed the man miraculously. Back to the chorus. 7 signs, oh, can you see? Miracles show his divinity. Every sign, a light divine, revealing the Savior in every line. And the outro. In chapter 11, Lazarus raised. Life conquers death, his name be praised. 7 signs, his power displayed. Believe in him, your debt is paid. Pretty cool. it just did it like that. It was just, incredible. Anyway, I thought I'd share that for fun.
That's good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So, yeah, did you have any sort of like aha moments? If you did, anybody do them, the other way, just kind of curious.
Besides me.
Do you have any aha moments,
I just got it.
Okay. Yeah. So I was reading through John chapter 4, and it just looked at, you remember the story of the woman at the well, and it says, do you not say, Jesus talking to his disciples, remember he's waiting for the woman to come back from the village there, do you not say there are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap for that which you did not labor. Others have labored and you have entered into that labor. What I was connecting this verse where we're seeing, these people coming down perhaps from the mountainside or whatever, and he's connected that in Amos chapter 9. It says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord. The plowman shall overtake the reaper and the treader of grapes who sows the seed. It's just like he's saying there's going to be such an abundance that you're not going to be able to collect the harvest before it's time to replant again. So it's just sort of like, I think there's a connection between those verses. I'm not going to try and explain it or go through it. It just like, I thought, is there a connection there? And I looked down at the footnotes in the Bible, and there they have it. So somehow there's a connection in there. But anyway, let me know if you have any aha moments like that as you do this. So okay.
One thing that Emily and I we were talking about the other night said, well, what verse, whatever hit you? And it was, woman, my time has not come yet.
Yes.
And he went in and did anyway. When she asked.
Yeah, yes, right.
Just,
yeah.
To me,
I know.
Wording.
Right. It's kind of funny.
Hey, Mom.
That's, yeah. I mean, that bugs you. That's something to just sort of note and say, why are you bugging me? And then he does it anyway, Yeah, exactly. Don't ask me to explain. We'll get to when we get there. Okay. We'll try and answer.
And there are other times when it's not his time yet, like when they were coming
My
to...
hour has not yet come, right?
Yeah. So
yeah.
that's...
Yep. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started in our study, the prologue 1 through 5 this morning, verses 1 through 5. I'm going to just ask John, if you'll take that, John 1 to 5, and just read that section.
Sorry, again?
John 1 to 5.
I'm reading it ahead.
Oh,
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that light was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it.
yeah. What version do you have?
Maybe?
Okay, great. Okay, obviously they're all very similar. Whatever version you're going to have, they're going to have they use that last word may change a little bit, overcome to understand or whatever. But anyway, we'll look at that a little bit later. In his book, The Forgotten Trinity, Dr. James White, he looks at the prologue, the whole verses 1 through 18, and he describes it like this. He says, it is a literary masterpiece. Its balance is almost unparalleled. It is a carefully crafted work of art, a revelation that has inspired believers for almost 2,000 years. The brightest minds have been fascinated by it and have always marveled at its beauty. It's an inexhaustible treasure. Few passages of Scripture are more important to our study of the Trinity, and in particular of the person of the Son, that's in the prologue of John. You see, John clearly intended this passage to function as a lens. Okay, this passage, the prologue, is going to open up the entire gospel to us, as sort of a window through which we are to read the rest of his gospel. So we'll look at that a little bit more intently and shortly. But John's prologue should be understood as a summary statement, as an executive summary for the whole book, you might say. Many of the phrases are captured, or the themes that are in the prologue are going to be captured and demonstrated later on in the gospel. Certain words and phrases pop out. So when you read the first few words in there, in the beginning, what does that connect you with? And the rest of the Bible. Genesis what? 1, the very beginning of the Bible, right? And so John is connecting us straight back into the beginning of creation. John Ritterboss's commentary says Genesis 1 constitutes the foundation of God's revelation of the Old Testament and of the Israelite religion, God's creation of heaven and earth. So, I'll just read Genesis. Didn't I have Genesis 1 through 5 available right now?
We can turn it.
Okay, first one.
Okay, Genesis 1.
Okay, listen, 1 to 5, and just listen to some of the words. Now, you read, I didn't ask you to listen to certain words, but certain words are in there. See if you remember what words might be reflected in here. Go ahead.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
Okay, if you compare Genesis 1 to 5 to John 1 to 5, there's certain words that collect, so the same words almost. And did you pick up any of them?
In the beginning.
Okay, in the beginning, certainly that phrase.
Light shines in the dark.
Light is in there, right? And darkness, okay?
And darkness.
Anything else that might come to it? Now, John is going to focus on life, and it's not so much stress in John 1 through 5 here, but all in Genesis 1 to 5, but all the rest of that chapter is God creating. It's all about life, right? It's just not specifically mentioned the word. So that this darkness, this light, and all is part of the concept and in the beginning. And then also says, I'm going to get ahead of myself. It says, and God said in Genesis, right?
Yes,
So when we look at, and this is done multiple times in Genesis, and God said, let there be light, and God said, let the earth produce, blah, blah, and so forth like that. But it's just a multiplicity. Let there be an expanse, let there be waters and so forth. And so we look at this, and there's this idea of somebody speaking. There are words being spoken, right? There is an element of communication going on. And as we look at that, when we look at Psalm 33:6, you have it, go ahead.
By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their hosts.
Right, and so there's this equating, the word of the Lord created the heavens and the earth, right? And the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. So we get this idea of breath, word, spokenness, and so even though it's not specified explicitly in the Old Testament, we see this connection between the word in John 1 and the idea of God speaking in Genesis, in the Old Testament. This idea of him speaking becomes the word of God, and we associate that with the idea of, in John's gospel, there's a connection being made there that I think, certainly the Jewish mind would have an inclination to think, okay, I can see what's going on here in terms of what is John trying to connect for me to. So what we're saying is the things that God says is equal to the word of the Lord. As he speaks, that is obviously the word of the Lord. And John is going to use this idea of the word itself. Okay, in the beginning was the word, and that Greek word, anybody know what that is? Say again? Logos, yeah. L-O-G-O-S, not Legos, Logos. Logos, whatever. And it means that, and it can cover a wide breadth of meaning, but the idea, heard in the context here, it's words, it's verbiage, it is communication, but you understand that there is mind behind it, there is intelligence behind it, and there's purpose behind it. There's a being behind it. So this would relate to, if you're Greek, you understand this concept here. It's meaningful to you. So he's talking both Jews and the Gentiles. And so now returning back to this idea of the masterpiece that James White described it as. He calls it a masterpiece, and one of the reasons is because he's very precise about when he uses the verb form. Okay, when you see this was. Okay, in English we don't see the connection, the specificity that is provided in the Greek here, and The idea here that the three was statements, we have the the clauses of verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, the second clause. And the third clause, and the Word, the Logos, was God. So when we look at this, the idea of this form, it's a certain form, and it basically means it is imperfect indicative action. If I said something was a perfect action, that means it was completed, done. Put a bow around it, we're through, you don't have to worry about it. So if I said, John was eating, if John ate a burger, okay, you understand what I mean. He ate the burger and it's finished, and we don't know what he's doing now, but presumably he's finished, right? Mm-hmm. You finished, John? But if I said John was eating the burger,
He's in the process.
well, that leaves it kind of ambiguous. We don't know if you're still eating it, right? You worry he was eating it, but we don't know when he began either. And is he continuing to do that? So the idea of this is John puts the verb in this format in imperfect indicative action to basically specify this goes way back. He's not specifying any particular time. But he says in the beginning, but this format of the word was is to basically put us even further than that into the eternal, you might say, state. Okay, and so that's one of the beauties about why it's such a masterpiece in terms of the verbiage, because later on in the next verse or so, as he talks about, he says all things were made or were created. He's going to use a different word for that. Even it's going to be it's a completed action. So that's an intensity. So he's referring to the eternal wasness. Okay. So next thing, when we look at the three clauses here, in the beginning was the Word. Okay. So if we talk about this eternalness of the was and beginning and Word, what are we saying about the Word then? Whatever this Word is, he's saying it
was
too
there.
is
was
eternal.
Yeah.
So anything that is eternal is divine, deity is associated with it, right? Because nothing else can have that property. So we look at that, and that's one. Okay. One important thing is it is deity, and you think in any religion it's just kind of true by default. Anything that is eternal, that has no beginning, and is obviously divine and has deity to it. If we consider the second clause and the word, so what I'm saying is we could translate this: in the beginning, always was the Word. We look at that text of the state of the verb itself. In the beginning, always was the Word. In the Word, always was with God. They're all that imperfect indicative action. And then in the Word, always was God. So when
Now,
we look at
when we talk about the word,
Yeah.
we're talking Jesus.
Yes, he's going to identify. He's going to be specific about that, but not, he's just saying in this terminology, he's using words, but it is going to be clear that he's talking about Jesus. Because he's going to say, and the Word was made flesh. Okay, so obviously it's going to be Jesus. Mm-hmm. Yes. So we look at the second clause here, the Word was with God. And the word with, we use with it just like, Nolan and Marianne's with Nolan, so to speak, there. So they're accompanying each other. But the word with here is a bit more, it's more directional. It's like the Word was toward God. He was facing Him. The idea is a face-to-face presence in here. The relationship is so tight and so understood that they're actually facing each other. The communication is clear. They're not just with each other. They're not just friends. There's actually an involvement that is between the two of them. And it's the idea of immediate relationship, eternally face-to-face. So at least we now have two persons in the deity. So it's kind of like a deity circle of trust. Lots of movie there. But even in the circle of trust, okay, if you have a circle of trust, you don't include your cat, right? I mean, your dog maybe. But when we look at things like, the circle of trust, you're talking about, you gotta be humans inside a human circle of trust, right? You gotta be God to be in the God circle of trust. So that makes sort of sense. So that just adds to the idea of that it is deity. And now, we are not gonna hear about the Holy Spirit within the prologue. That's okay. John's just focusing on the Word at this point, on Jesus. So the point that I'm making is that there's more than one person in whatever God is. But this now presents the horrible thought to a Jewish person, because what did they believe about God?
One God.
There's only one, right? Now we got at least two. So what's going on here? So they would have immediately rejected this in some sense, but then if they had scratched their head, they might have been thinking, well, way back in Genesis, even Genesis 1:1, it says, and God, and the form of that word is a plural form. But the verb is a singular verb. So, and multiple God, you might say gods created, in one sense. That's how it's possible. But we know from the Shema in Deuteronomy 6:4, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one," right? There's only one God. Why this conundrum all these years and years about a form of multiple, more than one in the number expressed, but there was always a singular in terms of the verb. So,
Well, it says God created us in our image, so later in Genesis, we created man in our image.
yes, exactly right. And same thing there.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely right. So,
Question about in the beginning. Okay? Why does it say always?
say again?
Always?
Always.
Is it in the beginning for the human mind? Because always, the word was always there. The word was with God.
I mean, why does it say always in there? It's just,
Why does it say, instead of saying in the beginning was the word, why doesn't it say always was the word?
I don't know. It's just the way John just expressed it. I can't.
And in the Genesis 1:1, in the beginning.
Well, I
And
think.
is it, because is it, something for humans to be able to grasp, because they could not grasp always or infinity.
Yeah. I mean, the concept of being able to grasp infinity is beyond our mindset. So it's just the way that John expressed. He's connecting between what he's trying to do is connect the eternal in some way with our creative world that we live in here. And so Genesis is actually, it's just really looking at the creation aspect. But John wants to take us that and beyond that. So I don't know. You can ask him when you get there. Why do you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So again, now, so when he gets to the third point, he has to respond. How can there be more than one God, so to speak, one person? So he says, and the Word was God. And in the Greek, in the literal order of the words, it says, and God was the Word. Okay? That's how it says it in the Greek. But Greek and Latin are what they call inflexive languages. English is an analytical language. So what's the difference between them? What's an inflexive language? You would certainly know this.
I have no idea what an inflexive language is.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I withdraw my claim.
Elizabeth might know.
An inflexive language.
It's very flexible.
It's flexible.
Well, that's sort of a key to it. I guess you could still do that. And the other one is
Let's
analytical.
not think too hard about this.
It's more thinking like
So,
math.
analytical, I mean, it's basically, you just look at it and it's based on the order in which it is. So you look at things, if it says, and God was a word, so to speak, you would look at it like that. That's how it's supposed to be said. The English is subject, verb, predicate. That's kind of the normal way that we look at the style of language, syntax and so forth. But in inflexive, the way that you understand the endings on the word help you get the order of the word, of the sentence, of the structure of what they're trying to say. So you could say, you could take a sentence in Latin and say it three different ways, and it's saying the same thing. You change the order, it doesn't matter, okay? But in essence, that's what I get at when we say inflexive, means that it has the ability within itself to, you understand the order of the language, the sentence there. So,
But the verb is a singular verb. Was is a singular verb. Were is a plural word.
yeah.
And so was refers to one.
Yeah.
So God was one. But as
Yeah, and we're dealing
but
just
there-
with singular.
but there, God, even though God is one, there's three parts to him.
Yeah.
So that kind of helps you with the realizing that God is one thing, or one
Yeah.
one deity.
Yes.
But he has three,
Right.
parts to him, but they're all the same.
Well, like the confusion would be like, for instance, if I said, Cheryl looks good. Let's say, we just say that, okay, nice. Okay, but if I said Cheryl and Cindy looks good, is that good English?
No?
Not really, huh? Because the verb, they don't go. You pair them, right, with the number, the verb associated with the actual people, the intent of what you're trying to say. But if I said Cheryl and Cindy look good, that's fine. You would understand that because there's a matching of that form there. But I really didn't study it as far as the particulars in terms of the verb singular or whatever. It doesn't kind of really matter in this case here because it's just saying there's an equivalence, so to speak, in here is what's going on. So, and another thing, by the way, about the language that we have here about, for instance, English, we have something called the article. Okay, the article is like when you want to be specific or indefinite. So when we say something, you use the indefinite article. So if somebody asks you to, look for the getaway car, okay, and you said, I just saw a car. Now, is that a meaningful thing? No. Why? Because it's indefinite, right? You didn't spec it. It's very indefinite. It could be 1,000 cars that have gone by, okay? So use the word a car is the indefinite article. But if I used, I just saw the car, well, now we're talking, right? So that is a definite article. So there's what they call this article stuff. That's also involved in how this works here because, if I can get back to my thinking here,
There's no particles.
the way that it works is, for instance, the way that the structure is that because the article is associated with word, then it becomes the Word was God. So that's why we reorder it from God was the Word to, it really is the Word was God. It's because of this rule of the article that is in the Greek, of Greek language. Yes.
If you put a before God, and the word was a God.
Okay, now that you're saying something totally different there. Yes, and that's important because John only used the article with the one. He didn't use it with the other. Because if you use the article with both of them, the Word was the God, so to speak, you're basically saying, you could flip it around. You could say it's indeterminate. You can't tell what's the subject and what's the predicate here. So, but if you said the Word was God, or God was the Word, is there a difference in in what I'm saying there? I said the Word was God, or God was the Word. There actually is. I don't know, it may not seem that at first glance, but the idea there is that what we're saying is that if you make it, it's sort of be like saying, if you put God first, you're sort of saying like all of God is all the Word. You're basically saying it's only the Word that is God. I know that's
It's like saying all squares are rectangles.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that.
I didn't hear what he said.
Like that all squares are.
Meaning like all squares are rectangles. So
Okay.
the idea of putting it this way basically makes room for the Father and the Holy Spirit. Okay. So I'm just going to leave it there and move on from there. What John is making sure that we avoid here. Remember when we studied the Trinity, there were specific heresies that we wanted to avoid. Does anybody remember the names of a couple of those heresies? What was the issue?
Modalism.
Modalism, right? What was modalism?
that God was in different
He
forms.
was operated this way, just changed his clothing, put on a different hat, kind of a thing. It was only one person in the Trinity, one person in the Godhead. So it's just God, and he's the same dude doing all three, aspects, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. What was another one that we looked at? About polytheism, tritheism. Remember, if you have three gods, that's abhorrent to the Jewish mind, obviously, and abhorrent to us, because God says there's just one, right? So we can't have that. And the final one,
It's like subordination. Yeah, where like Jesus is like created.
Where you have, they're not equal, okay? But by this kind of language, we really have equality in there too. So we kind of get the fullness of the deity, even though we're not laying it out in its completeness. The blueprint, the structure is beginning to take shape for us, okay? So that's why it's such a beautiful masterpiece in what it does. So, the way that F.F. Bruce says this last line, he says, you could say basically what God was, the Word was. There's basically whatever the God was, whatever is in God, the being, the essence of God, the nature of God, that's also what the Word has, you might say. Remember, we talked about being and personness in our Trinity study, so I won't go over it in detail right now, but this is what's going on here. All right, so the Jehovah's Witnesses, I'll just say this for a moment. Many of you probably familiar with, they'll take John 1:1 and they'll make it, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God, right? Okay, structurally, you could make an argument for that, but it just falls apart. If you try and use the same logic elsewhere in the text, you would never use it because it just makes nonsense out of things. So that this way that we have it is the correct way to understand it. All right. So we move on. Look at verse 1:1. We got through that, okay? So the second verse was, he was in the beginning with God. Now, it's really, you find this verse is really just kind of a re-emphasis of what we just said. But I think an important thing is maybe he calls it a he. There's an aspect of something about personness directed to it. So it's not, the word, like you were getting at, Peggy. Word can sound very impersonal, really, when you get down to it, right? It's just like the way I'm speaking. But by this means, he is now saying this is personness to it, okay? He was in the beginning with God. Now, any questions on that?
He is referring to Christ.
Yes, that's exactly right. In verse 3, we are given his evidence of deity through his rule in creation. So, if you have verse 3, anybody have that? We'll just read that.
Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made.
A lot of maids in there, huh?
Is that the same word as create in
Yes.
Genesis?
Well,
Or-
I don't know, but the word, a lot of translations will use nothing existed or whatever like that, and I think that's nothing began or whatever, and that's the idea. But there was nothing that could have had existence without him, and the way that it said, it sort of does it positively in the sense of all things were made through him, and that just to make sure we cover all the bases, there was nothing that ever was that could have existed without him. It's sort of a reinforcement to make sure that you get the point. Going backwards and forwards, you can't get out of being somehow made by this word, okay? All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So it's really, it's clear as can be. It's a lot of re-stressing in the same language, but it's really to make sure you can't assume something got made without him. Something exists without him doing it, okay? So this is the role of creation, and that has to be deity involved in that. Some translators say it may be a little better. The NASB, New American Standard, says all things came into being through him. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. But sometimes we think of made as, we're fashioning it with our hands and so forth like that. We're making it. Well, God didn't make that cup right there. didn't have to make, he made all the materials, so to speak, for it. It didn't come into being without him. Correct? All right. So, and John doesn't say some things or most things. He says all things are under this cover. And without him, nothing was made. So it's very deliberate in what he says there. So in essence, what we're looking at is the Godhead, which is eternal. Remember, this eternal wasness. It's always been there without end. But in essence, we look at the creation. The creation had a starting point. Okay, so there's a differentiation.
I think that may be why they used in the beginning, because that's when our time clock started.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. I think that makes sense. And so in verse 4, anybody have verse 4 available for today?
John 1:4.
1:4, yeah.
In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind.
Okay. So now you're gonna hear this word life and light. And you're going to see it a lot in this book. And even throughout the prologue here, we'll see it. In him was life, and the light was the light of men. Life is one of John's, the word life is one of John's characteristic concepts that he's going to use throughout the gospel. He uses the term 38 times. That's a lot of times in a book that's 21 chapters, okay? And oftentimes, he will use it. In this case, I think there's a big idea of life here, the broad sense of life. In other words, like we are living beings, okay? But he's going to use it much more so in the spiritual side of things, okay? He's going to use it in terms of like things about the life in the spirit, salvation, where they sort of thing, okay? So John, he's going to use a quarter of all times in the New Testament, life is used in this gospel. We think, and we even think of ourselves, what is the one thing, the most valuable thing that you possess? Your life, right? I mean, we think of the ultimate sacrifice, right? Giving up your life for somebody else in battle or whatever it is. But it is the ultimate sacrifice but then you think about it, did you give yourself life?
No.
Not hardly. Did your parents give you life? No. I mean, in one sense, obviously, through the action that they did, it started you, but a conception of you, but that they did not give you life, per se. And there's always the idea of what is the spark of life, right? What causes life? I could, put together a bunch of chemicals and stuff that would format in the shape of a body with everything right, and could I make it come alive? I mean, you're talking like Frankenstein or something of that nature. That's always the story of horror shows.
You just have to blow it up.
But,
Big bang.
You can't make something come to life. And it's only God can do that, right? This idea of the breath of life. Even when we talk about, the ChatGPT, the AI stuff, that's not truly life. That's what some people like to think it is, self-conscious and so forth like that. But ultimately, it's like what you said, models and so forth that are being used in this. So, again, when he uses this, in him was life, the idea is there that always wasness. In him always was life. Is that same idea of the verbiage there. But it's not just but we're looking at both the biological life and by extension, he's going to get into the spiritual life. And famously, for instance, in John 11:25, I'll just read that. Jesus says to her, that is Martha, he says what? I am the resurrection and the life. Okay? Life, the life, the existence of life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. Or John 14:6, this one, Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay? So again, it's reflected multiple times throughout, just in the prologue, he's just giving you an idea, a taste of what's coming up here. And then the second half of the verse, it says, and the life was the light of men. And I think it may be, it's kind of an awkward phrase there. It might, maybe if we understood it more as, and the life was the light for men. I think that might be an easier way just to grasp what is being said there. But ultimately, it's the idea of, in the metaphorical sense, it's spiritual transitioning. We're not talking about flashlights. We're not talking about, the light, you cut yourself open and you're going to get some beaming light in that. But light and life, they're characteristically used of religious symbols. Light in particular, got the candles, things like that. It's always light in the darkness specifically. So this will be another theme that's going to run throughout the book of John. And oftentimes light is symbolized as pure, holy, righteous, and good kind of light. And darkness is usually associated with evil, right? Hidden things, mysterious, right? Death sometimes. So there's a spiritual symbolism in there, and John is going to use it. He's going to exploit that, starting in the prologue. He's going to run through, and you're going to see it all throughout his book. And as you do your little, exercise there, just kind of look at that, see what's popping out at you. So we think of, for instance, there's a close connection between light and life. He talks about in John 9:5, as long as, this is at the Feast of Tabernacles, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world, okay? And then in John 8:12, he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Okay, there's a connection again in that. So, we finish our prologue with verse 5. Anybody want to read that for me? Gary, you got it?
The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
Yeah. Light shines in the darkness has not overcome it. So again, we're just moving along from the thing we've just been starting here. So it's the idea of this conflict, light versus darkness, is just throughout his gospel here. You're going to see that in multiple places. I just mentioned a couple of them in there. But he says, has not overcome it. And you'll see different translations, I think I said earlier. And the idea of the word there is to grasp something. And we talk about to grasp something. Well, we can think of things being to grasp it mentally. You understand it, right? You have an understanding. Hey, I get it, right? You hear that language. I get it. But on the other hand, you can grasp something physically, right? You get a hold of it. So the idea there is that's why you have sort of these multiple translations that are just like, we don't know which one. Do we say overcome it in the sense of, defeating it in almost in a physical sense, or has not understood it, or has not comprehended it? They're all correct in the sense that you can't defeat it. You can't defeat it either in terms of the spiritualness of it, the sense of non-physical, but also in the sense of the physical direction of it. So it can't extinguish it, maybe is what the one version says. But it does mean to grab hold. And I think maybe John meant it sort of ambiguous in that sense, to just sort of cover all the bases. It can't overcome. Yes?
Well, yeah, I guess it's kind of, why would the darkness want to grasp it, understand it? It seems more that the darkness would want to overpower it, or would be opposed to it.
Yes,
so
exactly. You're exactly right in one sense. We think of, like extinguishing a candle or something associated like that. But at the same time, we look inside of the person, and the darkness, the evil that is inside of a person can't understand truth. Just like God has to reveal truth to us in order for us to understand and comprehend it. So that's what I'm saying. I think he's got covering the whole gamut in the sense of the metaphorical, the spiritual element of it, as well as you might say the physical. Evil will not defeat Christ. So that's in essence in the physical, but it's also in the spiritual. So that's what I'm saying. It's just sort of ambiguous, but I think he's leaving it in that way to cover everything, all the bases in that aspect. Okay? So, and we sort of see it in John 3:19. I'll just quote that. So this lightness, darkness, duality, and conflict dominates much of the theme of the book. In John 3:19, it says, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. Okay, so you just get this contrast. Darkness being evil, light being good, light representing Christ coming into the world with blazing truth about God and salvation.
Well, if you look at verse 20, it kind of goes further than that, because it says, for everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works be exposed. It's like you just want to keep it.
Yeah, they would want to extinguish the light, right? Any questions, comments? Okay, So remember, take the little forms, and if you would, just throughout, a couple times during the week, just think about, try and remember what you remember about the gospel. Maybe write it in there. Then go through the book, just skim through it. I'm not saying you have to even read it, just kind of skim it, just to get the idea of what's taking place where and what are the happenings there. Just want to get really familiar with it. Okay? All right, well.